Welcome to this webinar, which is all about how you can support your child with their move to secondary school in September later this year. My name is Caroline Gibbs, and I'm a clinical psychologist for the Richmond and Kingston Children and Young People's Wellbeing Service. We work with children, young people and their parents, offering support with mild to moderate mental health difficulties. We know that starting secondary school can be daunting for both children and their parents or caregivers. Perhaps you have your own memories from secondary school, positive or negative, and it's natural to feel nervous about a transition such as this one. Here are some really common worries that your child may be having before starting their new secondary school. Perhaps they're worried they'll get lost, that they won't like their teachers, that they won't make new friends, or be able to cope with the work. You may be able to relate to some of these worries. Perhaps they are a reminder of when you were younger, or perhaps you have experienced similar uncertainty before starting a new job. These worries are valid, and it's important that we don't dismiss them or jump too quickly to reassurance when our child expresses thoughts like these. We'll think more about how we can support our child with these worries a little later. It's perhaps worth mentioning here that you and your children may have some worries about their going back to school during the COVID-19 pandemic. This topic is something we'll cover in a separate workshop, so please do let us know if you'd like further support with this. Having said that, lots of what we cover today will be applicable to worries about the virus too. So first, let's have a look at what anxiety really is. Some of this may be really familiar to you, but it's often helpful to have a reminder. We tend to experience anxiety when the danger of a situation outweighs the number of appropriate coping skills you think you have. In most cases, we tend to be overestimating the likelihood and awfulness of a particular outcome and underestimating our ability to cope or receive help from others. When a situation, or perhaps even simply the thought of a situation, leaves us thinking this way, the fight, flight, or freeze response is activated in our bodies. Here is a video which helps to explain why these uncomfortable and sometimes overwhelming physiological symptoms occur.
Humans, like all species, have self-protective mechanisms to help us survive. Our fight, flight or freeze survival response, the FFF for short, is designed to mobilize our brain and body to fight an enemy, run from an avalanche, or freeze to hide from a predator. Our brain sometimes misinterprets safe situations as dangerous and can set off false alarms. When the amygdala, our brain's watchdog, senses and barks danger, our body enters survival mode quicker than our rational mind can react, leaving it trying to figure out why we feel in mortal danger. When the FFF alarm is sounded, we start to breathe more quickly and shallow, causing hyperventilation, and our heart starts beating very fast. These changes can cause strong chest pain, which many people interpret as symptoms of a heart attack, when in fact it's just a result of the FFF activation, which can be relieved through breathing exercises. As a way of getting you ready for action, blood is diverted towards the major muscle groups. Blood flows away from our digestive system, causing the bladder to relax, and we might feel the need to pee. The mouth goes dry, nausea can occur, and we get the butterflies feeling in our stomach. Blood also rushes from extremities, leaving us with cold hands, but often sweaty palms as the action-ready body starts sweating to avoid overheating. Legs and hands can start trembling and feel weak, while tension starts building in big muscles like the thighs, neck, and shoulders. In our head, FFF alarms cause our brain to focus on negative memories, probably so it can scan them to avoid danger and negative outcomes. We get tunnel vision as our pupils dilate to increase our focus and long vision, but as a result, we lose our peripheral vision. FFF activation also reduces our ability to recognize differences in facial expressions. Too much oxygen and too little CO2 can result in dizziness or lightheadedness, which many people interpret as signs that they might faint. But because fainting is caused by a drastic drop in blood pressure, and because the FFF increases both our heart rate and blood pressure, it's nearly impossible to faint when this happens. Over time, depression, anxiety, and high levels of stress all harm the brain's ability to slow or cancel false FFF activations, causing them to happen more often. Knowing the symptoms of false activations makes it easier to recognize and reduce their effects.
So the fight, flight, and freeze response is vital to keep us safe and is why we have survived as a species for so long. If our children tell us they have a tummy ache or are feeling hot or dizzy, or we notice that their breathing is faster, these are useful signals to us as parents that they may be worrying about something. It's helpful to talk about these bodily reactions with your child. And we have a blank body map in an accompanying booklet that we can send to you, should you want to have a go at this with your child at home. We often find that when children understand that there is a reason for what's happening in their body, this helps. So helping to think with them, where in their body do they feel it when they start to feel worried about something? Normalising these feelings for them, telling them that we all experience this, and labelling these physical feelings as being linked to worries is also helpful. Helping a child to connect their bodily and emotional experiences will help them to learn to do this for themselves as they grow up. So we've so far looked at how our thoughts about a future event and our predictions about our ability to cope can influence our emotional experience and bodily sensations. We also know that our behaviour can be influenced as a result of this, and we'll now take a look at what we call the worry cycle in a bit more detail. So let's look at an example. Jack is experiencing anxiety about starting secondary school. He starts to have worry thoughts about getting lost, not making any friends, and predicts that he won't be able to do the work. This leads to Jack feeling scared and upset, and he starts to experience nausea in his stomach and feels hot. These thoughts and subsequent feelings lead Jack to think that he's right to be scared, and he starts to say he doesn't want to go to school. He also seeks lots of reassurance from his parents, asking them, will he be okay? Will he make friends? Will he cope with the work? These behaviours are short-term solutions and simply feed back into the cycle, because Jack doesn't learn that he can in fact cope with the work, that he will make friends, and that it isn't a total disaster if he gets lost. The reassurance he receives from his parents alleviates his worry, but only for a short time, and the thoughts just keep coming back. So what can we do to help our children? We're going to look at 3 ways of helping them with worry today, and we'll be looking at them in the context of secondary school's transition, but you can use these techniques to support your child with anxiety in a whole host of other situations too. So first up, detective thinking. It can be so tempting as a parent to find solutions for your child, particularly as this is something you would have needed to do for them a lot when they were younger. But as our children get older, this tends to be a short-term solution and doesn't help them to learn to approach or overcome a challenging situation. As your child enters into adolescence, it's really important that they begin to learn to reflect and analyse their own thoughts. And research shows us that it's much more effective to ask questions and encourage them to think like a detective, so they can test out their worries and learn that they can cope. This technique is something you may want to try with your children in the weeks leading up to their starting secondary school to work through any worries they might have. There are 5 steps for detective thinking, and we'll look at these one by one, and they're also in the workbook as a reminder. And it's perhaps just important to say that your child won't be able to do this exercise if their anxiety is really high in that moment, so if they're in fight or flight, because their thinking brain just won't be accessible. So if that's the case, you may want to try some of the relaxation strategies that we'll come on to in a bit. And once they've calmed down, you can then try this with them. So first of all, invite your child to write down the event and the worry thought that's leading them to feel anxious. Then ask them, rate your worry out of 10, where 10 is the most worried you've ever felt and 1 is not at all bothered. Let's use an example to work through these steps. So we'll go with, I'm going to get lost because the new school is so much bigger than my primary school. So step 2, invite your child to start thinking like a detective and pull out any evidence for or against this worry. Perhaps draw on their experience from similar situations in the past, or ask them, think about what a friend might say. To help your child identify for and against, you might ask them questions such as, what happened when you started in the juniors? Do you normally get lost when you go somewhere new? If you were to get lost, what would you do? Have any of your friends been lost before? What happened? If you find yourself tempted to provide them with the evidence straight away, just pause for a moment and try asking them a question that would help them to arrive at the same conclusion first. Of course, if they're really struggling, you can give them an example to set them off. And remember, as you're talking through these worries, just be mindful to really normalise that lots of children will be feeling this way. It's really common, and just be empathic with them. So step 3, then invite your child to write down a list of things that could happen. Ask them to write down the absolute worst possible scenario and the very best, alongside some neutral outcomes. And then once you've looked at all your evidence and you've got all your possible outcomes, ask your child to pick a balanced prediction that they think is most likely to happen based on your evidence for and against. You can then ask your child how they're feeling, if they're any less worried. Perhaps ask them to re-rate their worry on a scale of 1 to 10. And if it's still really high, you might want to give problem solving a go, and we'll come on to that a bit later. And finally, step 5. It might be really tempting to skip over this final step, but it's so important because it helps your child to reflect on what they've learned and allows them to bank a coping experience into their memory. Even if the worst possible outcome happened, it's really likely that this wasn't as bad as they'd imagined, and they will have survived and probably learned something from it. So we're now going to look through some relaxation exercises that you can try with your child. These techniques can be helpful to bring down that emotional response within our bodies and minds when we enter fight or flight. It can actually be helpful to practice these first with your child when they're feeling relatively calm, because they'll find it a little bit easier to learn and concentrate on what you're doing. Then once they've got the knack of it, it will be much easier for them to have a go when they're feeling overwhelmed. So this first exercise is a controlled breathing exercise, and a visual tool such as this one can sometimes be really helpful. There are lots of these on YouTube, so you can have a look through with your child to see which they find most helpful. In this example you see, you breathe in when the shape expands, pause at the top, and then breathe out as it folds down again. The aim is to breathe all the way through your diaphragm, so your lower belly should be expanding as you breathe in, as well as your chest. And I often encourage people to place one hand on their lower abdomen and one on their chest to practice breathing in this way, as we're all really used to shallow breathing with just the top of our bodies moving. If you don't have a visual image to hand, counting in your head is just effective. So anything between around 4 and 7 seconds on the breathe in and 6 or more seconds on the way out, the pause at the top and the bottom. And the idea being that your breath out is a little longer than your breath in. So just take a few moments now and have a go at this one. Hopefully now you're feeling a little more relaxed. So these next 2 exercises are an example of progressive muscle relaxation. And the aim here is to create tension in a particular area of your body before releasing it and feeling the benefits of that relaxation. This first example is great because it can be done anywhere. It's quite subtle, so often nobody would even notice if you were doing it. You squeeze one or both hands tightly for around 10 seconds and then release. And this focus and simultaneous tightening and releasing is also a good distraction from a mind full of worry thoughts. This second example is perhaps a little less subtle, but it really helps to loosen up that tension that we carry in our necks, a really common place to hold our stress. And it's quite a nice exercise to do before going to sleep, or particularly if it's before or after a stressful day. So invite your child to pretend they are a turtle or a tortoise, and ask them to pull their shoulders right up to their ears and their head down into their shoulders. And you hold here again for about 10 seconds and then release. So our final technique for today is problem solving. When we feel anxious about something, it's really tempting to want to avoid that situation or seek help from others to solve a problem for us. Problem solving is a great skill for your child to learn in facing a dilemma, and teaches them to identify and analyse a range of possible solutions, then have a go and reflect on whether it was successful or not. This is also a great way of increasing their independence and confidence to be able to manage tricky situations when you're not around. So here, you encourage your child to identify and express the problem and come up with as many solutions as possible. And it's good to pick a few sensible options and also some totally wild or wacky ones. It just doesn't matter. Then you invite your child to analyse this list of solutions. What are the pros and cons? Is this a doable thing? And then get them to rate it out of 10. And then once they've got their list and they've had a good look at it, invite them to pick which they think might be the best solution and see if they're willing to have a go. And then it's really important that you praise any steps or any attempt that your child takes to put this into practice. So the more you praise and support their effort, the more they'll be able to give it a go in the future. And just like the detective thinking, it's really helpful if you can check in with how your child got on after the event to help them to reflect on what went well or what they could do differently next time if needed. And finally, just a little reminder to say to take care of yourselves. Our children are heavily influenced by how we act and what we do, so it's really helpful for us to monitor our own emotions when supporting them with their worries. They're often sensitive to how we're feeling and take their cues from us. And bear in mind that your own experiences inform what you do with your children, but try to remember that your experience at secondary school is likely to be very different to theirs. So where possible, project an air of confidence, show them you believe in them, that they can do it. And remember, parenting is hard enough, but at times of transition or change, it can be extra challenging. So please do seek support for yourself if you're struggling. Speak to your friends, speak to your family, or go to your GP. We hope you found this webinar useful and that some or all of these techniques are helpful for you and your child. Transitioning to secondary school is an often daunting time for you and your children. Encourage them to share any worries or fears with you and really try to empathise and normalise what they're experiencing, even if what they're saying sounds a little bit trivial. If you feel particularly concerned about your child, please do speak to the pastoral team at their school because they'll be able to provide further support. And if you'd like a copy of the accompanying workbook for parents to go with this webinar, which covers everything we've talked through today, please get in touch with the school and we'll get one sent over to you. Good luck.